Let's talk about the compressor types then in the Logic Pro compressor. And when I talk about compressor types, I mean the circuit types that are available to us in the Logic compressor. And each of these circuit types offers a different character, a different type of compression, a different sound of compression. And that is achieved using emulations of, let's say, the electronics of all types of vintage compressors. And they all respond differently to the type of material you feed them, the audio you feed them. I'm just going to show you that. I'm going to go to the dynamics, insert the compressor, and there it is. And the circuit types are right here. The first one is platinum. That actually goes back to the late 90s when Logic Pro used to be called Logic Audio, and the platinum version of Logic Audio was the best you could buy, and that contained the platinum compressor. The other ones were Logic Audio Silver and Gold, and that is why we still have the silver compressor in Logic Pro today. But if you had the platinum version, this is the one you got. This was the flagship compressor for Logic Audio back then. And you know, it's still pretty good today. It's very capable digital compressor. It does dynamic control very well. It's a great bread and butter compressor. The other ones are Studio VCA and Studio FET. Then there's Vintage VCA and Vintage FET and Vintage Opto. We're going to talk about all of these in a minute, but first I want to show you what the platinum compressor is all about. And I'm going to need a new track for that. I'll do that right here with the plus button. And for this, I will create a drummer track. Now here's the thing. You may want to pay attention to what type of compressor Logic gives us on a drummer track by default. So I'll just create the drummer track. And there it is. This is not the drummer compressor. This is still the platinum one. I need to open up this one here because this is the vintage FET compressor. FET. And FET is short for field effect transistor. And that is actually the piece of electronics inside a FET compressor that deals with the dynamic control of your audio. That is basically the heart of the compressor. The advantage of a FET compressor is that it can actually handle very fast attack and release times, meaning that you can make stuff sound really smooth and energetic with a FET compressor. The downside of these compressors is that they cannot handle all that much incoming level. And that doesn't mean it's a problem these days, but it used to be in the analog days. But now that we're all digital, there's all kinds of workarounds for that, of course. But what does it sound like? Well, first let's play this drum loop through the platinum compressor so we can get a feel for the difference. You know what? Let's first try it without the compressor at all. Here we go. Sounds impressively good, and of course that's the number one way to get your mix sound good. Start out with good sounding stuff in the first place. Let's go ahead and turn it on and see what the platinum compressor does with a drum loop like this. All right, sounding good, typical digital compressor. Now let's put it on vintage FET to see why Logic actually fires up drummer using this type of compressor. So let's start the loop and play with this a bit. Well, there you go. This is it. This is the typical rock drum sound. Rock drums usually get the FET treatment. Every pop music producer in the world probably knows this or should know it. A typical FET compressor is this one, the classic 1176 by Universal Audio. It's a typical classic compressor for that big, aggressive rock drum sound. If that's what you're after, then this is what you need. It's probably being used on, well, let's say 80% of the rock music we've been fed in the past 40 years or so. And it's also great on vocals. You should really try a FET compressor on vocals. Gives that really nice classic edge to your recordings. So it's nice to know, originally made by Ure, the 1176 FET compressor. Now I'm curious though what the differences are between the vintage FET compressor and the other FET compressor in the menu, the Studio FET. So I'll play the loop again and let's see what the differences are. Yeah, if you ask me, the Studio FET sounds a little more defined in the high frequencies, a little cleaner than the vintage FET. So it's nice to have a choice between those different flavors of FET compressor. Let's go to the next tutorial and see what VCA compression is all about.